So pleased to see folks joining us from the waiting room. We are awaiting a good number of attendees, so we are going to give it another minute or so as folks enter the room, but welcome. Thanks, everyone. As you are coming into the room, we have a good number of registrants, so we're just waiting for this number to get up to something that looks like our registration tally, and we're going to get started in a few minutes, so please just hang tight. All right, starting to slow down, so I'm going to give it another few seconds here. Please hang on as we wait for those who've registered to log in. All right, it is a real pleasure to see such a healthy number of folks in the room. Welcome to our transfer application workshop for community college students. My name is Adam Sapp. I am the Director of Admission at Pomona College. And Amherst, Pomona, Princeton, Williams, and Yale have been traveling together virtually now for about a year since the pandemic began. We transitioned into these virtual workshops. And we know that for some of you, this might be the first time that you've tuned into one of our programs. And if that is the case, welcome. We're really happy to have you. We also know that for a good number of you, this is not your first time attending one of our programs, whether virtual program or pre-pandemic in-person program. So if that is the case, welcome back. And no matter how much you do or do not know about us, we have designed this workshop in late January to help you with one thing, and that is to learn about us and to prepare to complete a strong and authentic application to one or more of our institutions. Just a programming note, we have provided captioning services. We have a wonderful captioner here who is with us today. If you would find such services helpful, please select the captioning link below by clicking on live transcripts so that you can engage the captioning service. Please also use the Q&A function to answer questions. We have allowed you to upvote as well. So if someone else asked a question that you think is pretty good, go ahead and upvote that instead of repeating the question. We're not planning to address the chat, so please do use the live Q&A. I think that will make things go a bit more smoothly. And to help accomplish this goal of allowing you to learn a little bit about us and helping you prepare an authentic application, I am joined by 4 of the smartest and most committed admission folks that I know. And I want to just have them take a minute and just introduce themselves briefly so you know who they are. We'll start with Alex Buston.
Thank you, Adam. That's high praise. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Buston at Princeton University. I am the Director of Transfer and Military and Veteran Admission, and very excited to be with you here today.
Lexi Hurd.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lexi Hurd. Alexandra Hurd, if you ever received an email from me, I'm an Associate Dean at Amherst, and I've worked closely with our transfer and veteran population for the last 10 years. Thank you so much for joining.
Great. Patricia Way.
Hi, my name is Patricia Way. I'm the only one here whose first name does not begin with A or Alex or Adam, and I am the admissions representative from Yale University. I am also the director of Veterans Outreach. I read transfer applications from our non-traditional students, as well as first-year applications.
And we'll end on the best letter in the alphabet, Alex.
Indeed. So hi, everyone. I am Alex Diodezio. I'm an assistant director at Williams College, and I manage the transfer and veteran admission process for us.
Fantastic. Just so that you know, this session today is planned for about 75 minutes. We are going to move through a couple different sections as we get to individual presentations at the end and then Q&A at the very end. But we're really pleased with this group. So many of you responded to our invitation. We have lots of representation from California and Florida, from Virginia and Massachusetts and Texas, all over the country. And we're so pleased that you could join us today. We're also very appreciative of the fact that many of you took time to answer the question or to ask questions in your registration, and we have collected those. We've looked at them. Alex Buston is going to run a Q&A that is dynamic and responsive and make sure we get to a lot of your questions, but I can assure you we're not going to get to all of them. So that's why we hope that you'll upvote some questions that you would find helpful. You'll ask community-oriented questions today, and that if you have specific individual questions about your situation that might be a little bit more tailored, we would ask that you email us, and the emails you'll see on upcoming slides. We do have a slide presentation that we're going to move through. I'll ask Alex to advance the slide one more to go over our agenda. This is for you as you might be taking notes and sort of keeping track on today's workshop. We're going to begin with some information on liberal arts and admissions, move into the application and review process. We are going to discuss the college essay and talk specifically about letters of recommendation today. We also know, and there were a lot of questions about financial aid and credit transferability, and we know that's on your minds. We are going to talk about that specifically, so make sure to stay tuned for that. We're going to then end with some tips on admission, and then we're going to go into part 2, which is our college specific information, where me and my colleagues are each going to talk about our individual institutions. And then finally, we're going to end with you. Your questions that you ask in the Q&A, as well as those that you have previously submitted. Alex from Princeton is going to walk us through that conversation to end on. So we have a great presentation for you today. The room is very full. I'm very happy about that. And I think we'll now move on and begin the program. So one of the things that I think is so critical is that as you are considering any of our institutions, that you understand that at our core, this liberal arts philosophy in the way in which we educate and the way in which our faculty believe is so critical to their teaching and their research and their engagement with students, that we actually do think about this as it's connected to our evaluation to an application. So we believe in interdisciplinary learning, and we really want to ask questions that allow you to tell us what connections you see in the world. So whether it's in the world of work, whether it's in the world of your community college classes, whether it's how you grew up, there's lots of things that we think in your daily life, academically and non-academically, you can connect. And we really tend to want you to talk about those connections, because that to us signals a sense of awareness to the world around you. And that's so critical to engaging a liberal arts education. We also believe in diverse voices. We think they add value, and we ask questions about who you are. And most importantly, we ask questions about who you think you're becoming. And we know that as young people, as well as some of our more mature applicants, you're always changing, right? And so as you evolve as a thinker, as you evolve as a leader, no matter what your age or life experience, there's always something that you can reflect upon that has happened to you that is going to make you you. you a little different. And that is very attractive to us in the evaluation process. And so we want you to talk about those reflections that you have. We also know that many of you are coming in with a focus. Many of our students who transfer in or come in through our programs for adult learners, they tend to be a little bit more focused, whether it's a major or a career path or an interest that they want to explore. That's great. We're really excited about that. But when we're looking at transcripts, and you'll hear a little bit about this later, we want to see all your classes. We want to embrace your breadth as much as we champion the things you might be specifically interested in. So you're going to see some questions that get to this sort of breadth, intellectual breadth that we really insist on you having as you enter our institutions and then pursue education within them. We also all believe in small classes. This isn't new. If you've done some research on us, you know we think small classes are catalysts. They're drivers of the learning. And some of you may have been in small classes previously and you'd like to continue that. Others of you may have only been in large classes or have not had as much access to faculty and to leaders in the learning process in the classroom, and you're craving that. You want that now. So we really want you to talk about learning style. Talk about what is it about our learning style, our learning structure, our learning format that is attractive to you. And we also, saying with another breath, we also know that not all learning occurs in class. This is a group who I think especially knows that. When you think about the leader you are, the learner you are, the kind of student that you may be of life or within a classroom, you know that everything that you've learned has not been learned in a classroom. Life is a great teacher too. And we really do want you to tell us about that. Those lived experiences are critical. For some of you, that might be as a parent. For others, that might be military service. For others, that might be a winding path through higher education that is now leading you into one of our institutions. Those are really interesting stories, and we're always excited to read about them. And finally, I just want to say, and we all believe this really firmly, we do this work because we know that our institutions value the contributions of transfer students. We have all selected an application that really allows us to value you in a way that can be broad enough for a group of people with a diverse set of experiences, and also specific enough to allow us to be able to get at how you fit or match within our community when you think about what your goals are and as an institution, what we can provide and who we can support. So use that application strategically, use it well, and tell your story. Those are really, really important big picture things to keep in mind as you get into this process. It's very, very easy to get into the weeds here and think too much about the technicalities of the application. But I really wanted to start by thinking about the big picture. At the end of the day, the big questions are still important. Who are you? Where are you going? How do you hope our institutions will help you get there? And who do you think you can become in our institutions and beyond as you use that education to catapult you into the next thing, the next phase, the next moment in what is surely going to be a lifetime of opportunities for you. So I will end there and we'll move on to the next slide, and I'll ask my colleagues to come on and talk a bit about the application review process more specifically.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome, everybody. And I am so glad to see so many of you joining us tonight, or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As you prepare to work on your transfer applications, probably foremost on your mind is what the admissions committee looks for in their applications, in applicants. And maybe I'm just a bit nerdy, but the favorite part of my job is reviewing applications. I love reading your essays, seeing what classes you have taken, and learning about you from your recommenders. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about our whole person review process. If you attended one of our previous joint admission sessions, you may remember that I said that we take many factors into consideration when evaluating applications. I cannot give you an easy answer about your likelihood of admission because we do not base our admissions decisions solely on quantitative measures like GPAs and test scores. We don't have a formula that we use. Of course, your past academic performance is important, but it is not the only factor that we consider. The fact that we don't use a formula to make admissions decisions doesn't mean that we make decisions simply by pulling names out of a hat. We certainly put a lot of thought into each application. Perhaps the best way for me to illustrate our whole person review process is by providing you with two examples of successful applicants. First, there's Meredith, and that's not her real name. She did not have the strongest high school transcript. She had grades ranging from A's to D's. Her family circumstances in high school were rather difficult, and she was bullied in school. So her high school years were a struggle. After graduation, she enrolled at a local community college where she took a number of classes, including history, biology, composition, math, psychology. Meredith ended up getting all grades in the A range in her college courses. I mean, she really turned her academic life around. She held student leadership positions at her community college and led many initiatives to make her college more community-oriented. Her letters of recommendation from her community college instructors confirmed her contributions to the community college and to the classroom. Her application essays revealed that she would contribute a different perspective to our campus and work to make Yale a better place. And we were happy to admit Meredith as a transfer student to Yale. Meredith received her associate's degree in 2019 and entered Yale that fall. My second example is Bill, again, not his real name, who graduated with mostly A's and B's in high school. And Bill enrolled immediately after graduation in a liberal arts program at a four-year institution, where he also received A's and B's. He left college after two years to work for a couple of startups. He was really interested in entrepreneurship. He took a few classes part-time at a community college while he was working full-time, and he received all A's. Unlike Meredith, Bill was not on a track to receive his associate's degree. Nonetheless, his intellectual passion shone through his essays and recommendations. It was clear that he was ready to return to college to complete his bachelor's degree. And that's 8 years after graduating from high school. I know in the Q&A box, I saw some of you sort of ask about sort of, what's the difference between sort of getting an associate's degree or just transferring with credits. And so for the 5 institutions here, the associate's degree doesn't really matter one way or another. And it's really more important, the classes that you take, that is important to us. And with Bill, from the application, the admissions committee really got the sense that his non-traditional background, his professional experiences, and intellectual curiosity would be a welcome addition to our campus. So Bill too was admitted. And so I hope that these 2 examples I shared reveal that we seek students who will not only thrive academically at our colleges, and that's certainly important because we are first and foremost academic institutions, but also students who will contribute in other ways to our campuses. Though the examples I provided are of Yale students, both cases are representative of students at all 5 of our colleges and other schools as well. And you may have noticed that I have not mentioned anything about standardized testing. While 4 out of our 5 colleges required the SAT or ACT prior to the COVID pandemic, all 5 of us have been test optional this year because many SAT and ACT tests were canceled. So applicants without testing will not be penalized in any way. Amherst did not require testing for transfer applicants even before COVID, and will continue to be test optional for transfer applicants even after this year. The rest of the colleges here tonight will make our decisions later, maybe in the spring, as to whether we will remain test optional for transfer students applying for fall 2022 entrance. So if you will not be applying until next year, stay tuned because our testing policy may stay the same or they may change. I do want to spend a minute discussing an applicant's academic preparation. We want to admit students who will succeed academically, so we want to be sure that whomever we admit are academically well prepared. We expect applicants to present strong recent academic credentials with grades mostly in the A range on their college transcript. The trajectory shown on your transcript is important. The admissions committee likes to see a consistently strong academic record or a transcript that shows an upward trend in grades. It's not unusual for successful applicants to have had softer grades earlier in their educational careers. But as I said earlier, we do expect the transcript to show strong recent performance. No matter your intended major, it is important to have strong writing and quantitative skills. So it is helpful to see on the transcript courses that focus on analytical writing, such as composition, history classes, English classes, as well as classes that focus on quantitative reasoning, like math classes. Your other courses should mostly be in the liberal arts and sciences, and depending on your college, they may call them general education courses. Avoid taking courses such as criminal justice, communications, business classes, because we do not offer those on our 5 campuses. This does not, however, mean that you should not apply to our schools if you're studying business. But I would encourage you to include some liberal arts courses in your program. And admission to our colleges is highly selective, but I would encourage you to apply if you have a strong recent academic record, you wish to pursue a liberal arts education, and want to actively engage a campus community. Of course, you should also be sure to apply to colleges with a range of selectivity. I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. And I understand that the admissions process can be stressful because you don't really know what the outcome will be. But I hope that I have been able to demystify the admissions process a little bit for you. So let me now hand the presentation over to my colleague, Lexi from Amherst, who will share her thoughts on the essays and the letters of recommendation.
Thanks for that, Patricia, and good evening again, or good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, depending on wherever you may be tuning in from. And as Patricia and Adam were talking about things, we do practice something called holistic admission, and the essays and the recommendations, which I'll talk about next, are a huge piece of this whole thing. So, we can see the numbers on your transcript, we can see your GPA, and those are all very kind of factual, black and white aspects of things. And the essays and the recommendations are really the area of the application where we can peel back the layers and figure out a lot more about, what makes you you, or what kind of student that you might be. So I'm really excited to talk about these things, although I do know that the student writing and the essay portions can sometimes be the most stressful things for you all sitting in your seats where you are right now, especially those for whom are putting together your transfer applications right now. So what I will say is that the 5 of us all do require essays. They often can be, in the form of kind of a personal statement, but they're not supposed to be, I guess, overly business-like or formal necessarily. We are definitely looking at the quality of your writing. We want to make sure that we all have good writers in there, but we all do require these. And I cannot stress enough how important that these are. Occasionally I'll talk to students and they're like, oh, you do require an essay, but it's just kind of a formality thing and it's not that important. All of the required application components that you will learn about today are incredibly important to our process. And as Patricia was mentioning, we are selective institutions. And so we do end up having More students apply than we have spaces for. And so do not discount how much we will be reading your essays. They should be personal and reflective and authentic as best you can. Everyone is in the process of figuring out who they are and who you want to be. So I'm not pretending that you need to be this kind of fully formed nirvana person in your essays, but they should sound and feel like you, true to your experiences, and true to where you want to go. And the flip side of that is to not approach your essays first and foremost with the approach of like, oh, here's what Lexi mentioned that she wanted to hear about students coming to those campuses. Those are often essays that are fine. They end up being written thoughtfully, but they don't end up telling me much about who you are. And those are the ones that aren't, I think, the strongest in our process. So really start thinking about, in your life, whether you've had a lot of experiences or you're someone that is more like 18 or 19 years old and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't think of the main thing that I need to tell them. That's okay. But think about what are the things in your life that have influenced and the experiences that you've had that have most shaped you. And those are the things that largely we want to hear about. Many of us have multiple essays. Not all of us require more than one essay, but many of us do. And all of us will have multiple different forms of writing. As you approach, if you are applying to an institution like Amherst, for instance, that does have 2 essays that we require, think about them together in a way. They're very much separate essays, but use them together, make them work for you. So if we give you 2 different opportunities and 2 different questions, ideally we want to learn 2 different things about you. Occasionally we'll have a student who will kind of tell me a similar trajectory, a similar story in the second essay as they have in the first. And that's not wrong because there's not really a right or wrong per se to anything that's going on here, but it is really a missed opportunity. So when you're looking at the various writing components in an application, think about, okay, can each one maybe shed another layer of who I am or add a slightly different dimension of something that's important to me? Those are really successful essays and collections of essays. Do make sure you read the questions and do make sure that your writing does address the question in one shape or form, but do make them work for you. You'll find that many of our questions are super broad. And there's a lot of different ways that you might be able to approach that specific question. And that's intentional because we have a lot of students with a lot of different life experiences who are in our pool. And we don't want to limit necessarily the kinds of answers that you may have for those. So if you're reading any of our questions and you're like, wow, I could address this in a million ways, think of one. Think of one that's the most important and reflective to you and answer it from that perspective. Do start early on these. They're not the best when you've waited till the last minute and kind of throw them together. And do edit them. I will strongly suggest that you edit. If you think you're done, awesome. Let it sit for about a week and go back and read it again. And oftentimes you might find a few additional things. We've all had that experience where we're working on a paper and we think it's in good shape, but we've looked at it so much and so closely for so long that we need a little bit of break from it. And then you can go back and perhaps have some additional thoughts on that. Sometimes I hear from students too with their essays, they wonder, I've had a lot of life experiences. Maybe I'm an older student that's returning to education. How do I fit everything in to all of this? Know that you're not going to fit everything in to your essays, and that's okay. We know that essays are limiting in and of the fact, there's word limits and things like that. But it is a good idea to maybe address a little bit of your past, some of your present, and a little bit of what you are hoping to achieve in your transfer journey as well. So perhaps a third and a third and a third, if you're really stuck on how to approach it, might be a good tip that I give students occasionally. In terms of the edit piece, I will also strongly suggest that you have somebody read your essays. I would probably say maybe 2 or 3 different people read your essays. Perhaps someone that knows you well and someone that doesn't know you maybe as intimately, if you feel safe letting them read your essays, depending on how personal you're getting in them. But a good tip is to have, ask that person after they've read your essay, Does that essay sound like me? Do you feel like you might be able to know something about me? And what are your impressions that you are left with about who I am and what I might be looking to do or gain from my transfer experience after reading this essay? And if the responses are not what you're hoping for, it often does not mean you need to trash the entire essay, but it might mean that you want to do a little bit of editing, perhaps in the conclusion or the entry or the introduction or something like that, and just kind of round out some of those big messages that you hope to be leaving with the admission committee. I'll also say that most of us have short answers in our application. Some of us have more of those than others. Those are also important. So while the essays are the big main star of the show when it comes to writing, do not neglect being thoughtful about some of the other writing portions that we have in any of our essay applications. If we have one on activities or work experience and a thoughtful process there. Some of us have multiple short answer questions in lieu of a second essay. So you can see all of that on the common application or coalition application. I will also mention that some of us have an analytical writing piece, which is required, I know at least by Princeton. Ours is optional. You will have to look at the individual websites for this. What I will say is that that's an opportunity to showcase a little bit more formal academic writing. You'll find that your personal statements and the essays that we have are very personal, and they're meant to be personal. It should be well written, but it's very different to put together a personal essay as compared to an essay that you would submit for political science or history or English or something like that. So some of us do have that option for an analytical writing piece, and this would be something that you've already written for a class that can kind of give a different sense of you as a writer as well. Other areas of writing that I will mention quickly, which are often all optional. There's a section on additional information. Some of us have a question on if you've had a gap between when you've started high school and when you've gone to college. What have you done with that time? So do know that there are some other opportunities for writing. In particular, I'll make a note about the additional information section. That is optional. And you should all feel free to use that at any point for any of our institutions. If after answering the questions that we've asked of you, you say, there's this other aspect or this other thing that I think is really important for folks to know. Sometimes it can be just a sentence. Sometimes it can be a few sentences. It's not meant to be another essay, but please do utilize that section if you feel it may be necessary. I think I'll move into recommendations. Thanks, Alex. So the other pieces on recommendations, these are an awesome opportunity for us to learn a lot more about who you are as a student and as a community member, not in your own words, of course, which those are the essays, but from the eyes and perspectives of other folks who know you. And that is a really nice way for us to round out the picture of who you are. What is your sense of who you are? And then also, what are the impressions of others? In particular, the academic instructors, all of us here require academic instructors, are a way of us to get to know you. What kind of student are you? We see your transcript, and so we see your GPA, but that only tells us so much. A professor or a teacher can weigh in and let us know, are you the kind of student that is a grade grubber? Do you tend to play it safe, or do you choose the more challenging topic or essay question or lab report, if you have the opportunity to do that? What kind of projects did you do really well in? How did you grow throughout the semester? How did you respond to feedback? How did you work with the other students in the classroom? And I hope that you can see in many ways then, those are the ways that after we get a sense of, we have so many students perhaps in our pool who, based on a transcript, we think, okay, this student could do the work with us. And the recommendations and the essays are where we really get a lot of the flavor of who you are and how you may show up on our campuses. So some quick nuggets for the recommendations. I would strongly suggest that you ask a professor from a course that is roughly a 3-credit course or higher. So kind of stay away from those courses that are 1 credit or 2 credit, not because they're not meaningful experiences to you, but oftentimes the higher credit courses, so 3, 4, 5 credits or something like that, you've done some really substantial work. That's why they have some higher credit hours. So, you know, you've done some really challenging papers, you've had some really challenging exams and things like that. And so those kinds of classroom environments are the ones where they can talk a lot to your critical thinking ability, your problem solving ability, you know, how you tackle these really big, tough questions. So that's why I put that in there as a recommendation. Ideally, a course that may be in a course that you may find yourself in at any of our institutions. So humanities, social sciences, foreign languages, mathematics, science courses, those are all great. Oftentimes those are your 3 credit or above courses as well. Your advisor's totally fine to provide you with a recommendation if they've taught you in a course. If your advisor is not somebody who's taught you in a course, I would not suggest that you submit that one as one of your 2 required academic instructors, but you may submit that as a 3rd recommendation. And sometimes high school teachers are okay, and sometimes they are not permitted. So please do look at our individual websites to make sure that you are following our instructions for who we are able to have as recommenders and who we're not at our individual institutions. In addition to the 2 academic instructors, we do have other recommenders that you can also use. So this would be ideally someone who may be your employer, volunteer, internship, an advisor. If any of you have served in the US military or currently serving, oftentimes this is somebody, we often receive really great recommendations from your CO or someone else that you've served with in that capacity. But these are not submitted by most applicants, but they can be. And if they've used typically 1, maybe 2, but typically 1 is a good factor to, or a good number. Oftentimes I will say with the academic instructors, sometimes we get questions, can I submit more than 2 for my academic instructors? And what I will tell you is based on my experience, 10 years of reading transfer students, oftentimes 2 is the right number. The 3rd one is often quite positive, but doesn't often add anything additional beyond what we've already seen in the first 2. My last note that I have on the bottom there is on the college report. I have that here because it is not a recommendation. The college report is something that is required for many of us, depending on your individual situation. If you happen to be a student who is not currently enrolled, you may not have to submit this, but the college report is to be filled out by a college official at your current institution as a means of letting us know that you are in good standing at your institution. So that does not need to be completed by someone who knows you personally, nor is that person going to write any sort of qualitative prose about you. So in terms of the college report, do not think of that as a recommendation, but do know that we do want to make sure that you are in good standing and don't have disciplinary issues or something ongoing, perhaps at the institution to which you are currently enrolled. Okay, I have put in a bunch of information there. I have some tips that perhaps I'll share in some of the Q&A, but I will move on perhaps to the next section.
Thanks, Lexi. So now that we've kind of covered some of the elements of the application, we also wanted to take a little time to touch on what happens after that application is submitted and once you're potentially admitted to 1 or more of our institutions. So that post-admission process. So upon receiving a letter of admission to 1 or more of our institutions, you're going to also receive 2 very important documents. One is your financial aid package, and the other one is a credit review. I know that we get a lot of questions from students about both of these items and both of these pieces in the process, and rightfully so. They're really important to thinking about your next step. And so we wanted to be transparent that these will be provided with you, assuming that you submit all of the documents you need on time. These will be provided with your letter of admission so that you have plenty of time to really think through them, ask questions that you might have, and really be able to make an informed decision when it comes time to decide on what's going to be your next institution. So with the financial aid package, that is going to be an individualized financial aid package. So it will be reflective of you and your individual circumstances. And all of our financial aid processes kind of reflect a few of these central tenets that I wanted to go over. So first off, we really care about financial aid and we invest in it deeply because we want our students to be supported, to have the resources that they need so that they can really thrive at our institutions. And so that means that we do offer some of the most generous financial aid programs in the country. We also focus on need-based aid. So what that means is that we're going to get your financial aid, your financial data through their financial aid applications. And based off of that, we're going to see how much you and or your family and or you and your spouse, it'll depend on your individual circumstances, or an independent or dependent student. But whatever the situation, we'll see that financial data and see how much you can pay towards college. It could be $0, that could be more, whatever it is, we'll see that number and see how much more do you need then beyond that to be able to cover the cost of attendance at our institutions. And I'll talk about that term more in just a moment. So that however much more you need, that's what we will do our best to comprehensively cover through the financial aid package. And when we say cost of attendance, what we're really meaning here is as much as possible, all of the different costs that come up with attending our institutions. So tuition certainly, but also room and board, also personal expenses, things like cost of books, travel back and forth to campus if you're going to be going somewhere else during the summers, things like that will get factored into thinking about your financial aid package. And again, we'll do our best to address all of those as we put together the final package. And really for us, this is meant to be a student-centered process. As I said, we want to make sure that we're supporting you as best as we can so that you can really be successful during your time in our institutions and take full advantage of everything that we have to offer. And part of that too, by being student-centered, is that we're really going to make sure we're offering that support that you need as you just think through the financial aid package before even deciding whether or not to attend one of our institutions. Ask all the questions that you have, clear up any of the confusions, maybe let us know if it doesn't feel sufficient to you and you want to put in an appeal. All of those steps of the process are really important, and we want to give you plenty of time to go through that before you make your choice. And the same goes with the credit review as well. So again, that will also be offered. An individualized credit review will be offered to you upon getting your letter of admission if you're admitted. And with that, we're really thinking about this in kind of an individualized way as well. So we'll really look at your specific classes, at your specific institutions, and decide what's transferable for us. The general rule of thumb, though, to go by here is that if you're taking courses that are similar to the types of courses that are offered at our different colleges, then they are likely going to be transferable. A really easy way to just get a sense of that is to go to our websites and take a look at what are the departments at our colleges, what are the majors that we offer, are you taking classes that fit within those areas? If you are, again, they are likely going to be transferable. The big follow-up question we often get there is what about online classes? Especially right now, this is obviously a big question since during the pandemic, most classes are online. And so I'll say that for a lot of us, most online classes are not going to be transferable, but we've certainly all made kind of different allowances and exceptions to that rule. And especially with the pandemic in mind, knowing that so many circumstances are outside of our control, we haven't all been able to take classes in person and for very valid reasons, then we've been able to kind of change our policies to some extent to reflect that and try to be supportive of that. But we do each have kind of our own nitty-gritty pieces of that. So definitely that's going to be a question to ask to each individual institution to get the details. But I just wanted to make it clear that, again, while many online courses are not going to be transferable for us, we do certainly have exceptions to that rule, and sometimes they can be. Whatever the case though, whatever your kind of whole experience is, that will be reflected in the credit review, and you will get a detailed sense of what credits am I going to be able to bring into each of these institutions, how many credits, and what does that mean for my standing at that institution? What class year am I going to be coming in as? Am I going to be a fall semester sophomore, a spring semester sophomore, a fall semester junior, something else? We will make sure to give that to you as well within that credit review so that, again, you can be as informed as possible throughout that process. And when it comes to making a choice of where am I going to spend the next so many years, you really know everything that you need to know going into that choice. And that's really the most important part of it to us. And as I said, there will certainly be opportunities for questions, for conversation around both of these pieces, for any of the pieces that you're just kind of wondering more about, that you want to talk through a little bit more. We'll certainly have the time to do that as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Alex B. to talk a little bit more about kind of tips on the process as a whole.
Thanks so much, Alex. You've heard some great advice about our processes, about our philosophies, and also about the approach for the individual parts of the application. So I'm going to talk a little bit more big picture as you think about the application in the coming weeks as our deadlines are approaching if you're applying for this year. But it's also good advice to keep in mind if you're applying maybe for a future year, depending where you are. on the process. So a lot of information here, and I'm going to try to go over these points succinctly, but in appropriate detail. So first of all, as we said, don't rule out colleges that maybe seem too selective or too expensive. We are all highly selective institutions, absolutely, but the selectivity rates, or whoever you look at it, the chance of admission, your individual chance or the overall chance, that number is 0 if you don't apply, if you don't consider it. So don't say no to yourself or take yourself out if you feel there's a very good fit here for the institution. And in terms of the cost or an institution being too expensive, private institutions like us absolutely have the reputation of being among the most expensive. But again, as Alex D'Adezio was talking about, the amount of financial aid that we have and the resources we have to support these students is really unparalleled in the nation and in the world. So again, there's great financial aid available. And especially when it comes to the application, I mean, $70, $80, $90 per application, sometimes more than that as the application fees. That does add up when you look at it, but ask about application fee waivers. These are very easily accessible for students, especially from low-income backgrounds or supporting themselves. Generally, U.S. military veterans or active duty students, that fee is automatically waived regardless of income. So if it's not clear that you can qualify for a fee waiver and activate it easily on the website, it doesn't hurt to ask about it. More often than not, we'll grant these. And on the theme of financial aid, don't forget about concurrent financial aid applications. So you'll have the application for admission that you'll submit to our offices. And then there'll also be a financial aid application, which has a deadline for submission, usually a little bit afterwards, maybe a couple weeks or so, sometimes concurrent. The important thing to remember here is, well, two things. First of all, do apply concurrently for financial aid with admission, because if you are admitted, you'll want to know what your financial aid package will be. What resources will you have to support you in terms of tuition and living expenses before you respond to that offer of admission? Every student should absolutely have that. Second of all, the deadline, by definition, is definitely a very scary concept, that it has to be in by a certain time. There is a lot of flexibility here as well. It doesn't mean if you miss the deadline, especially for something as important as financial aid, you won't get any financial aid. That's absolutely not the case. You can submit materials afterwards. The financial aid office will work with you, as will we in some cases as well. I think really what I want to hammer home is when it comes to submitting this material and expecting the material, we are reasonable people with reasonable expectations, so they'll work with you to make sure you get that information in. But do consider, make sure you apply for financial aid at the same time. In terms of considering your application, whether you're applying this year and in a couple weeks for those deadlines or whatever, set up your application account early. So all of us use either Coalition application or the Common application. These are the most common application platforms that are used to apply generally. Set up your account, but then also apply to the individual institutions with the supplements. Get that process rolling early if you haven't already. You don't want to start just a few days before, not thinking about what essays you're writing and so forth. Take some time to go over those and give yourself time to review them. That'll be important. So get started on that sooner rather than later. And importantly, in addition to that, you'll be submitting your material, so the actual questions, your responses to questions and so forth, and your form yourself through that platform. But you also have supporting documents. This has come up a lot with transcripts, with recommendations, as was talked about, and we've seen the questions in advance and in the Q&A about submitting those. Create a plan for this. This might be something you're familiar with from the recent election. Make a plan to vote, given what an unorthodox year it was. Make a plan for your application for submitting those materials. Get started earlier in terms of whether it's requesting the transcripts, requesting the recommendations, and also the midterm grades as well, as you submit those after the deadline potentially. Make sure, do your best that you can make sure that you get your application in, your form, and ideally the supporting documents in by the application deadlines. And we'll pass those on when we talk about individual institutions at the end in just a little bit. All we ask is that you do your best. Again, as I said earlier, we are reasonable people with reasonable expectations. We know you're busy. We know your professors are busy. The registrars are busy. They might not get until March 5th or whatever to send the application recommendation. We will still accept it after the deadline. We completely understand that. Again, we are reasonable people, but do your best to get everything in, because the more you work to get it done by the deadline, the less of an issue it's going to be if something comes in a little bit late, a week or so late, rather than a month late, for example. So get started on that early as well. I want to talk about the midterm grades and the midterm reports, because that's something that's also come up a lot as far as the question. The transcripts officially come from the completed grades, come from your registrar, their official record. So make sure you have those submitted to us as well. The midterm grades is a little bit more haphazard and unofficial. In the past, if any of you are familiar with it, it kind of involved a form that you would access, which you can still access. And in a normal year, and this is anything but a normal year, but in a normal year, you might, for example, print that out and then go to your professors in person and have them write your grade and sign it or whatever. Obviously not a reasonable expectation. And what did I say? We're reasonable people with reasonable expectations. So however you want to get this information to us is absolutely fine. If you want to have the PDF form and kind of download it and email it and then have them send it back to you, or have them send it to us directly. So for your 4 classes, you send us 4 forms instead of 1. Or maybe you just have them send us your grade, or maybe you just send us your screenshot on Blackboard or whatever. Really, it's unofficial. I mean, we'll just accept whatever we can. Don't think that this is a huge impediment because you're online. Most people are. We understand that. So submit that to us however you can. When you're actually writing the application, I won't spend too much time on this because it was already covered. Just make sure that you are answering the application essay questions. So you might have a couple paragraphs or essays that you're writing that are really important in kind of telling your story, and you might submit similar material to different colleges, and that's absolutely okay. But keep in mind that there are institution-specific questions that you may be able to reuse some of the answers, but you also may not. And I think it might involve an answer that's more tailored to a specific thing at Princeton versus at Yale versus at Williams or Amherst or any other college you're applying to. So make sure that you're answering that question that we're asking of you, and you're relating it to yourself genuinely and to the institution. Doesn't mean, if you apply to 5 colleges and they have 3 different questions that you have to write 15 completely separate essays, because again, the themes might be similar that you're talking about, but do make sure that the response in particular to institution A and institution B are applied and written and tailored to institution A and institution B, and ideally don't mix them up. Make sure that you're taking care on that. Another question that came up a lot is about the extracurricular activity. So you go to school, you do your academic work, but also what do you do outside of that? How will you engage beyond that? I think a lot of students feel, obviously, even in a normal year, that there are limitations here about the kind of traditional school clubs people are involved in, and that's very common. But again, don't limit your definition of extracurricular activity, because for us, an extracurricular activity is really anything you're doing that's meaningful as a commitment and outside of when you're in school and when you're sleeping. Pretty much. So that might be some of those clubs that you opt into. It might be a full-time job or a part-time job, or supporting your family and being home for your family in other ways. Again, anything you do that is a time management strategy in addition to your academic work, that's of value to us, because again, that shows us that you are involved, whether by choice or whether by necessity or some combination of those areas, in addition to your strong academic performance. So explain that to us, and do explain those limitations, whether it's because of your work or you had to stop doing something due to COVID restrictions or whatever. There are parts in the application to explain that, but if there were limitations and you had to stop, like, what did you do to get around them? What else did you do now that that was a limitation? Explain to us how you adapted and how you adjusted. Everyone's adapting and adjusting. Again, that's a reasonable expectation, and as I said, we're reasonable people with reasonable expectations. So tell us about what you're doing and how you've adjusted. I did mention also additional updates can be sent through the application deadline. This can also be done usually through an applicant portal. So once you submit the application, that's not kind of the end of it. Then you're not, it's not as though you submit the application, then you have no more contact with us until the decision. Usually you get obviously a confirmation that we've received it. And with that confirmation, we'll let you know that there's an applicant portal you can access to track sometimes receipt of materials, or sometimes to submit additional updates or additional information as well. It's okay if that's come after the deadline. Midterm, if it's not available before that, midterm grades are a very good example of that. Or maybe it's a new award or a new achievement or a new scenario that you need to tell us about. You can usually do that through a portal. You can also email it to us to update your application, and we'll add it to your file. So again, it's not as though that's it at the end of the story after you submit. You can definitely add material after that if you need to. Won't spend too much more time on this about thinking about how you convey your experiences and your story and perspectives. But again, that's something to maybe just jot some notes about, because this was talked about earlier. This is what we want to get to know, who you are and what you do and what you're interested in, and how you get to, or what you're planning for in the next couple of years. That's not necessarily illustrated by the grades on the transcript, or maybe scores if you have them. So think about how you're going to tell the story. And I think this can also factor into your recommendations. If there are instructors or optional recommendations that can also provide some background and some support to articulate those different achievements or those experiences or goals, that's also helpful for us as well. I would also just make sure, and this is maybe more for maybe older or non-traditional students, just make sure that you are explaining your trajectory and your unusual circumstances in the application. So I mentioned non-traditional students because these are the most common students who have those questions about whether it's a non-traditional, non-linear path, which maybe involve not having a great performance in high school, or maybe the first time in college or the second time in college, but you found it the third time or whatever. That's actually pretty common, more common than you would think about some of the students we have on our campus. I think Patricia did a good job with some of those examples earlier. It's absolutely fine to not have always been a great student, and that's very common. But I think it's always helpful for us to know a little bit about why, what happened, what got in the way, and especially if that impacted your academic performance. If there were negative circumstances, financial or personal or otherwise, to the extent you're comfortable telling us about those circumstances, that helps us inform our review of that first time in college that didn't go so well. Was because the student just wasn't motivated, but you're motivated now? That's great. Tell us about that story. Or maybe there were extenuating circumstances. Military students who were deployed, for personal family issues, you had to withdraw. Without that contextual information, you usually don't have that context to apply, and it doesn't add to the application if we don't have it. So encourage you to speak about this extenuating circumstances as well. Use those additional information sections, or possibly submit a CV or a resume, particularly helpful for non-traditional students or non-linear paths, just kind of mapping out a trajectory of what happened. If you're kind of what we consider a traditional student, you were in high school, then immediately after high school, you went to community college full-time, and then you are applying to us, then that's probably redundant because your trajectory is pretty self-explanatory. But a good number of students, maybe the majority of students here, that's not necessarily the case. So just having something that says 2015 to 2016, or 2016 to 18, you were doing this, and even if it was work or whatever, that just helps us understand that roadmap as well. But can't stress enough that we have many students who have always been great students since high school, and now we also have many students who are equally successful who were not always great students in high school or in college. Again, the recent academic performance is what's most important. So I know it doesn't necessarily feel that way when you're sending us your high school transcript or sending us past college grades that weren't as great. The reason we're asking for that information is because that also helps us build the roadmap of your trajectory and also understand the background for that. Where did you leave off in high school? In what courses? Or where did you leave off the last time you were in college? Because believe it or not, like if you had substandard grades back then and you're doing great now, that substandard performance actually informs your current grades even more impressively. It makes it even stronger. If you failed calculus the first time but are getting an A now, that's impressive because again, that informs your trajectory and how you approach the academic process and where you ended up in your current state as you apply to us as well. That's the most important part as we review it in the application process. So a lot of tips here that I hope are helpful from the big picture perspective alongside everything that was shared earlier. So now we're going to step back a little bit and switch gears and move to the next part of the presentation where we'll just share some quick snippets about our individual institutions to help you get to know us a little bit better. And we're going to start alphabetically by college with Lexi at Amherst.
Thanks, Alex. And I know that we're coming up on a full hour of all of us talking quite a bit, a lot of information. I know we want to get to some Q&A next, so I will try to keep this brief. There's some wonderful bullet points there about Amherst College. We are in Western Massachusetts, located in a town, we're named after the town, Amherst, Mass. I will spend my 60 seconds or so plugging an event that we are having on February 2nd and 3rd, which is this coming Tuesday and Wednesday. We're having a virtual community college transfer open house. I will drop the link to that in the chat as well. We'd love to have some of you join us if you haven't already signed up. We're going to do an information session, a virtual tour. I'll do a little bit of a session similar to this, a transfer application workshop. And then on the 3rd, we'll have a faculty panel and an Amherst College student transfer panel. So please do consider joining if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Amherst College or have some more specific questions about the application process at Amherst. We're happy to have you join us. I will mention very quickly, which is true at all 5 of the institutions here, is that we deeply value our transfer students on our campus, in particular those who come to us from community colleges. And about half of our students that have transferred into Amherst have previously attended a community college. And oftentimes those students are first generation students from moderate to low income backgrounds. So I will leave you with that. I'll mention very quickly that we are have an open curriculum and that we are a member of the 5 College Consortium. An open curriculum means that you do not have general education requirements or distribution requirements at our institution. So lots of flexibility to chart your own educational path. We do require a major, and we have about 40 different academic majors. And we are also a member of the 5 colleges. So in our little area, we also have the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Mount Holyoke, Smith, Hampshire College, and us. And once you're a student at Amherst, you can take classes free of charge at any of those other institutions as well. So some great opportunities, and I will hand it over. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks, Lexi. I too will be quick. Many of you are asking great questions about Pomona in the chat, so I think that means you know a little bit about us. For those of you who do not, we are located 35 miles east of downtown Los Angeles in what is, at least compared to the rest of the country right now, sunny Southern California. It was 70 degrees today, not too bad. I think one of the things that is critical to know about Pomona, we are a liberal arts institution with just over 1,600 students. We belong to a consortium as well. So as Lexi was talking about the consortium in Western Massachusetts, we too belong to a consortium here in Southern California. The Claremont colleges includes Pomona College, Claremont McKenna College, Pitzer College, Harvey Mudd College, and Scripps College. Together we form the Claremont system. You attend one school, you can take classes at all 5. You live at one school, you can participate in extracurricular activities at all 5. 1,650 students at Pomona, about 6,000 total undergraduates at the Claremont colleges. Pomona teaches 600 classes. There's 2,500 classes for you to take at the Claremont colleges. We are an incredibly diverse institution. We're very transfer friendly. We do plan to enroll a certain number of transfer students every year because we want those transfer voices in our community. We do commit to our transfer group to having between 40 and 50% of our students who transfer to Pomona who are community college students or veterans. So we really want those voices. We prioritize you in our enrollment process. We are very DACA friendly, undocumented student friendly as well. And we have strong support, as all my colleagues will talk about and we have talked about earlier, when it comes to mentorship, internships, research support, all the things that we know our transfer students want. In many ways, our first year students want as well. All of those programs are available to all students. So we're really eager to have transfer students on our campus, really excited about you all. We have a little bit of an earlier deadline. I'll just point that out compared to our peers here. But please do ask questions in the question Q&A box as we continue on to learn more about Princeton. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. Great to be with you all again. Just want to quickly mention where a little bit about Princeton. Starting off, the location is easy to remember. Princeton is in Princeton. We're located in the state of New Jersey. I think of it as a small suburban town sitting right in between New York City and Philadelphia, about 50 miles away from either of those major cities in both directions. So a good combination of a suburban area, but access to major metropolitan areas. It combines being a major research university and a small liberal arts college. We actually have almost twice as many undergraduates as graduate students, which is pretty rare for a major research university. So there's a heavy emphasis at all times on those undergraduates. And that allows us to provide all the resources needed, including guaranteed research and housing opportunities for every single undergraduate, regardless of what your major is, where you come from, what your background is. All of our students are guaranteed that opportunity to work one-on-one with faculty on research and also to be living on campus for all years. And family housing is available for students who are coming with significant others, children, pets. We have housing friendly for that. With a transfer program specifically, this is a new endeavor for us. It had been defunct for a while and was reinstated in 2018, specifically with community college students and U.S. military veterans in mind. The fall term entry is the only program we have. The application deadline is March 1st. As I mentioned, we'll have a sheet with all of our deadlines soon, but we only have the one term, so you're coming in with a full year's worth of credit, for example, for fall term only. We admit about 13 to 15 transfer students every year, so it is a small program to make sure that we have the guidance necessary for them, but just about all of them are community college students and or veterans, one or the other or both. But they are all supported not just by myself as the Director of Transfer and Military and Admission, but also by our separate Director of Transfer, Veteran, and Non-Traditional Student Programs, who acts as the primary liaison, advisor, academic, non-academic, to connect students to all the administration. So it's kind of a one-stop shop where he coordinates everything he and I work very closely. The majority of our transfer students and also veterans are qualify for full financial aid based on their circumstances. And because we do guarantee to meet that for every single student, regardless of when they come in. There's more information on our admission website, admission URL right there. You can also just search Princeton transfer student and it'll come up. And also I invite you to connect with our current students on Instagram here. These two IDs for @Princeton Transfer for the Princeton Transfer Association, as well as @Princeton_veterans for our Princeton Student Veterans Group. They'd be love to talk to you and you can get a good sense of what they're up to these days on campus. So there's a little bit about Princeton. I'm going to move right along to Williams College, and I'll pass it off to Alex.
Thanks, Alex. So next up, Williams College. So Williams College is located in Williamstown, Massachusetts. We're in Western Massachusetts, kind of right near the border of New York State and Vermont, about 3-hour drive from Boston and New York City. And we have about 2,200 students on campus. Like many of the pieces that some of my colleagues have touched on, as a liberal arts college, we also offer a lot of flexibility with the kinds of classes that you can take and double majoring and all of those pieces, so that you're really able to kind of take the lead in shaping your curriculum and being able to take lots of different types of courses and really the ones that interest you most. We also offer something that's super unique called the tutorial class, which is a class modeled off the Oxford University system with 2 students and 1 professor. So pretty much as small as you can get when it comes to class, and a really different model than a typical class too, that's really based around kind of academic dialogue, feedback, and regular sharing of work. So an opportunity to really deep dive into an academic subject and just grow tremendously as a student. We really have a super tight-knit community at Williams. It's a super special community to be a part of. I was a Williams student, so I definitely remember it well. And it really means that you just have a ton of support, a lot of access to resources as well, and just a community that you're surrounded by that really wants to allow you to do the things you most want to do. So they work with students to come up with new ideas and to get the funding you need to see ideas through. There are a ton of mental health resources available for free to students. Financial aid, as was mentioned, we meet 100% of demonstrated need for all admitted students. And again, many of our transfer and veteran students are also receiving full financial aid packages. So really, again, giving you the pieces you need to just do well. Our transfer and veteran community specifically is about 22 students right now in a community that we're looking to grow on our campus. Many of those students are from community colleges. In fact, 100% of our admitted class last year was from community colleges. That varies a bit from year to year, but definitely a priority for us as well. We do offer really an individualized process throughout, but specifically when it comes to housing also. We guarantee it for your whole time on campus, and we do offer options for both on-campus housing as well as off-campus units. We offer a lot of flexibility with transferable credits, so we will tell you what class year you can come in as, but you also have the option to give up transferable credits and instead come spend more time at Williams, which we actually have a lot of our students do, even if coming in they think they won't, because they end up just wanting to have even more time on our campus to take advantage of all the resources available. You can see our deadline here of March 1st. We do offer fall entry only. So just know that for our college. And if you do come, you'll have a dean of transfer and veteran students who will kind of be your point person to entering into the college. But again, a really holistic support system for you throughout. Please don't hesitate to take a look at our website, to contact me by email. I'm happy to answer questions and set up time with students. And with that, I will hand it off to my colleague at Yale.
Thank you, Alex. For those of you who are not familiar with Connecticut, Yale is embedded right in downtown New Haven, which is a small city with a population of about 130,000, and it's conveniently located between New York City and Boston along the Interstate 95 corridor. I like to tell people that New Haven is large enough to be interesting, yet small enough to be friendly. There are over 100 restaurants within walking distance of New Haven Green, and New Haven has the second largest collection of free public art of any city in the United States. Many of you asked about housing, and Yale is sort of right in downtown New Haven. So for students who are not living on campus, there are many rental units. There are a number of students, whether they're first-year students, transfer students, or Eli Whitney students who live off campus in lots of rental. There are lots of rental options. Yale is the largest university among this group of 5 colleges. Like Princeton, we're both a research university and a liberal arts college. Our 6,000 undergraduates can take advantage of many of the resources of our 13 graduate and professional schools. So for example, the Yale Medical School is within walking distance of our undergraduate campus, and it's not unusual for undergraduates to do research with med school professors. Many of our undergraduates do research in some of our 1,200 laboratories. While we're a major research university, Yale College is also a liberal arts college, and we place special focus on undergraduate learning. The student to faculty ratio is only 6:1. Yale is not a place where our faculty members do only research or only just teach graduate students. For example, Professor Nordhaus, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, teaches our intermediate economics classes. 3/4 of our classes have 20 students or fewer in them. We have multi-tiered advising. A vast majority of our students do some type of research during their tenure at Yale. And they can even sign up for their own personal librarian, which I think is pretty cool. There are 3 pathways to apply to Yale, and I have noted the application deadlines on this slide. The first year and transfer programs are self-explanatory, and most of you will be applying as transfers. The Eli Whitney Students Program is a more flexible program designed specifically for adult students wishing to pursue a traditional Yale undergraduate education. Eli Whitney students receive the same bachelor's degrees as other Yale undergraduates and have access to the same classes, majors, facilities, research opportunities, and abroad experiences. But they have the option to take classes on a full or part-time basis. They live off campus, and financial aid is somewhat different. Examples of Eli Whitney students include veterans of the US military, parents whose education was disrupted because they were raising families, and people who took time off to pursue professional commitments. As you can see from this slide, nearly half the students admitted to the transfer and Eli Whitney programs transferred from community colleges. We think that community colleges really do add much to our campus. If you have any questions about Yale's transfer program, please contact us by going to admissions.yale.edu/transfer-admissions. If you have questions about the Eli Whitney Students Program, you can email me. My email address is at the top of the slide. I'm sure that you all have questions for us, so I'll turn the presentation over to Alex Buston from Princeton, who will moderate the Q&A.
Thank you, Patricia. So quickly before we get into the Q&A, just wanted to add a quick resource for students who might be attending with a military background, either as active duty, reserves, or a veteran. Definitely check out some of these resources we have, including a session we did similar to this back in October, specifically for military serving or students who have served as well. I'm just putting that in the chat as well, the tiny URL as well. It's a full session like this with a Q&A specific to applying with that background. If you haven't checked out some of these partners of ours, or you haven't connected with them, highly recommend doing so as well. The Leadership Scholar Program works specifically with students in the United States Marine Corps. Services School, though, will work with any student who is currently active duty or as a veteran and support them in this process with a perspective of being veterans themselves, having gone through it. And also the Warrior Scholar Project, another partner of ours who is designed also by veterans themselves, but also helps to facilitate on campus, or in some cases, virtual academic workshops or boot camps at our universities taught by our faculty. So highly recommend checking out these resources for veterans and active duty students. So moving on then to the Q&A. There's a lot to get through here, as you all probably have seen. In advance, we got close to 700 individual questions submitted, well over 200 live questions submitted in the chat live during the session. So as much as I think we would love to say we could answer every single one of them individually, as Adam mentioned earlier, that was ambitious. So we've been doing our best. We'll try to talk to the ones that came up most often in advance or prior as well. So, during the live session, but we'll definitely want to make sure that we're answering what you're interested in. And again, you can always get in contact with us with our offices to ask more specific questions down the road if we didn't get to them. A couple other pieces here. If you didn't get a chance to register in advance for the session, probably most of you did, which is how you got the link. But if you got it, otherwise, we do suggest registering as well through this link, where you can just let us know you were here, that you attended the session. It'll also connect you with our mailing lists as well. Just put that in the link in the chat. And then also, like I said, we'll do our best to send a recording of the session afterwards. This was more of an application workshop, but we did a similar session back in October, which was more broad about the process, about considering it, so which could also be a good resource. And the link to watch that recording is on the slide here as well. And I'm putting it in the chat. So, and then lastly, as I promised, we have the application deadlines listed here as well for the upcoming cycle for fall 2021. These are pretty similar from year to year, so they don't change drastically every year, but just to have these in front of you. So now we'll start with the questions that were submitted, and I'll pass these on to some of my colleagues. One of the ones that was upvoted quite a few times and we thought would make sense to answer live was asked just now. And for students who the entire time in college has been during the pandemic, and Lexi, I'm going to throw this one to you. Since school has been virtual and there may be kind of a question about or limitations of relationship with professors, what should they do in terms of asking for recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of the pandemic, of course, is that for even those of us who would love to be in in-person classes, which all five of us, really value small class sizes, getting to know professors very well, that learning process that it happens with everyone else, it's just not possible. And that's true at our institutions right now. What I will suggest are a few maybe tips. We're not going to waive those largely. We will still require them. We do know that there are many students in that situation. And so as we do holistic review, we will understand that we may not see as many specifics or as lengthy a recommendation from this cycle as maybe we have seen in the past. So know that we have that in mind. What I would suggest perhaps is a few tips for you if you are studying online would be perhaps to, when you're asking your professor, maybe you ask your professor for a recommendation and you're saying, oh, thank you so much. Like, here's sort of what the process looks like. You could let them know perhaps a few projects that you really enjoyed in their class, a few topics. You could let them know some of your thoughts about transferring, perhaps in an email. You could share your resume or your CV. You could also ask to perhaps meet with them over Zoom or a phone call or something like that, so that they can just hear from your perspective, perhaps some of your reasons for transferring. And sometimes that helps get them a little bit of material. Oh, you know what? I remember that paper that you wrote about that topic, and that was a really great paper. And then that's sort of a specific aspect of the class that they could maybe tell a little bit about in their recommendation. So it's not a perfect answer, but I do think that there are a couple of small tips that you may be able to let the professor know that perhaps they might have seen more of if you were studying with them in person, but perhaps even digitally, we can get some of that same information there. If there are opportunities, if you're doing synchronous learning, of course, they can still comment on your discussion that you may have, depending on the size that you are in Zoom or Google Meets or whatever you may be doing. Or, of course, if it's asynchronous and you are relying on a lot of message boards or something like that, do participate in those. They'll see, they know your name from a lot of that too. So they can likely comment on some of the aspects that you've been engaging with in the course, perhaps even if they don't know you as intimately as they may have otherwise. So we do recognize that it's a limitation. We do have it in our mind, but hopefully maybe those are a few tips to help you through that process too.
Thanks, Lexi. Definitely makes a lot of sense. Again, just re-emphasizing how we're reasonable people. We will read these within the context of what's provided. Patricia, a question we got a lot in advance and in the live Q&A here, and I think you talked about this a little bit, is what specifically are the main differentiating factors we look for in either transfer students or in Yale's case, Eli Whitney students compared to first year students? What are the main highlights you would add there?
I think for students who have been out of high school for a while or who have taken a break from their education, I think sometimes the application forms don't necessarily do a good job soliciting information from you. So I think don't be shy about putting information in the additional information section that you think is relevant, but there's no specific question on the application that asks you about that. So don't be shy about doing that. If you have, it is important, if you've been to a number of different colleges, that you make sure that we understand the chronology. And if you have worked or done other things aside from going to school, I think it is also helpful to really provide us with a chronology and information about that. I always think that for especially non-traditional students, it is helpful to submit an optional resume, even if the colleges are not asking for it. I think that is that will provide the admissions committee sort of a better sense of your educational and professional history. And you don't have to focus so much on your high school extracurricular activities. I think some of you asked about that in the Q&A. We really are more interested in things that you have done recently, you know, things that you have engaged in. And certainly you may enter information about what you did in high school, but we're really more interested in what you've done academically and otherwise in sort of more recently. Does that answer the question, Alex?
I think so, absolutely. A lot different pieces to discuss, and different things to tell us about in the application as well. And I think answers the question about why some of us it's just come up as well, put so much emphasis on transfer students, and Princeton in particular reinstating the program. And the reason for that is because I think of these different perspectives that we're getting from transfer students, whether they've had a linear traditional path or non-traditional path, and they make great examples of different perspectives and contributing to the learning experience for all of our students on our campus. Kind of following,
Alex,
I'm sorry, go ahead,
Alex,
Patricia.
sorry, I just kind of actually had something to add to that. When I was talking about the admissions process and what we look for, I really kind of focused more on sort of individual applications and gave you some examples of successful applicants. One of the things I didn't talk about is really the fact that we look beyond just individual applicants. We're looking to admit, as you said, kind of as diverse, as interesting, as academically strong class as possible. So sort of on one hand, we are looking at all of you sort of as an individual, but on the other hand, we're also, you know, sort of our goal as admissions officers is to build a class.
Definitely. And going back to the individual approach, and as we talked about a little bit, Adam, I was wondering if you could answer a question I got, I think it was pretty well worded. I think this was in advance. Is what's more important in terms of what students present on the application? Talking about their achievements and what they've done so far, or talking about their potential aspirations and ambitions of what they hope to achieve at our colleges and in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think you have to balance it, right? Because one of the things we really look for when we're reviewing applicants is what kind of impact have you had in your prior communities? And this might be as some of you, I was looking on the comments there about your extracurricular activities. This might have changed a lot during COVID. For some of you, it looks like it was church. For some of you, it was an online community. For others of you, it's a work community. For others, it's a traditional liberal arts college community, or for a community college community. So we know that you are a multiverse, right? You exist in many spaces and many places. And so what we're looking for is reflection on action. What have you done and where have you been? And really telling us those things is critical. Now, the other piece of this, which I would say is as important, is we also want to know who you want to be at our institution. We are all blessed with many, many resources, and we provide students with lots of opportunities. So which among those opportunities are you most excited about? What are the things that really get you eager to join one of our communities? Maybe it's a research summer, maybe it's working with a faculty member, maybe it's a club organization that you really want to join or that you're excited about. Maybe it's a mentorship opportunity that you've never had in a previous educational setting. Those are the kinds of things we're interested in as well. If I were to sort of be forced to put a number on it, I would say 75% of the time, tell us about what you've done. 25% of the time, tell us about what you want to do at our institutions.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Adam. I think it's a very good way to summarize it. Alex, we've talked, Alex Diodezio, I should specify since we have a lot of common names. Can you talk a little bit about the adjustments we've made for COVID, whether it's testing optional or otherwise, and how possibly that might impact admission cycles going forward, spring 22 or fall of 2022, to the best of your knowledge?
Certainly. So this is a great question, and I know it's on folks' minds, so thank you for whoever asked this. But yes, many of us have, or I believe all of us have gone to test optional this year. So that does mean that you do not have to submit the SAT or ACT. You can, and we'll consider it as just part of our holistic admission process, as we've mentioned, but you certainly don't have to, and it does not count against you in any way if you choose not to submit testing. Moving forward, we're all kind of keeping an eye on the process and making decisions about how that will look in years forward. So for some of us, we're already test optional. It's not new for COVID. For others of us, this is a change this year. And so we're thinking about, will that be a change that continues moving forward? Williams just announced, I know our test optional policy will continue for the next couple of cycles, and we're all looking to make these decisions fairly soon so that you can all be informed with plenty of time. But kind of keep an eye on the websites for the latest information there. And then outside of this test optional change, the biggest change here, and in some ways you can call it a change, and in some ways it's not at all, is really just being mindful, as Alex keeps saying, we're reasonable people who think in reasonable ways. That very much applies to the pandemic here, right? So we understand that things don't look the same. I've seen a lot of questions in the Q&A about, I don't have access to the same kinds of activities. I'm not able to do the same kinds of things with my time outside of class. We get that. We understand that. As I think a couple of folks put words on earlier, tell us what you're doing with your time instead then. It might not look the same. You might not have the access to the same opportunities. Are you reading some books? Are you taking some online courses, watching YouTube videos about particular topics that excite you? We're flexible in thinking about these things, and just know that as we take the approach to reading your application this year, and as you give us that context about the limitations you face because of the pandemic, we will absolutely take that into account as we review your application as a whole. And we understand that these things are out of your control and they won't be held against you in any way. And so I think that's, again, a change in some ways, but also just really reflective of our holistic admission process that's really always in place and always trying to take into account the whole person.
Definitely, thanks for that, Alex. And I think some we can definitely all agree with, and I think a lot of other similar institutions would definitely emphasize. A question we got up a couple times in advance, as well as I think a couple times in the Q&A, was about a reapplicant, someone applying additionally after having not been admitted in a prior year, or maybe you were admitted in a prior year and didn't attend. What advantage or disadvantage does that particular student have? And I think I can take that one because I've seen that. I think we all have, but there's no specific advantage or disadvantage necessarily. I think the thing to keep in mind is that we want to get a sense of what's different in this year. So maybe there's a year in between, which is most common, or maybe more than that as well. But we do absolutely admit students who maybe have not been admitted in a prior year. We have them on our campus in some cases. And I think it's really just a question of focusing on what's different. In some cases, a student needed maybe an extra year, a little bit more time of academic preparation. Maybe there were other experiences they had that influenced the growth. Really, I think don't necessarily repeat the same information. And obviously, if it's just 1 year or 2 years, a lot of the information will be similar. You don't have to submit new official documents that we've already received. If it's the transcript from 5 years ago, you don't have to submit that again the second year. For example, test scores is another common example. But I think focusing on what's different, and maybe reiterating some things if they're still relevant from your prior application. But also making sure to let us know what's a little bit different. And yes, we have had students, like I said, be admitted on our campus after reapplying. So we're getting close to time. So I'm gonna, I think, take one more question to throw out as a concluding question that also came up a few times. And I think really, if just a final piece of advice for the application, and keeping in mind as with all the information that we gave. And I think I'll throw something out, and I'll invite any of my colleagues to also mention something. Really, don't count yourself out necessarily just because of what you're seeing with the admit rates, or you're seeing about your trajectory and so forth. And I think another colleague of mine at a different institution mentioned this, I think, pretty succinctly, is don't say no to yourself. If the answer is going to be no, the other institution to which you're applying or whatever should be the person to tell you that. But by not applying, by not considering it, you're saying no to yourself, and maybe prohibiting a possible yes answer that you may never have known. So a lot of you are here watching live, maybe watching the recording session. And so I think you're making a good step towards that. But I think at least take advantage of the opportunity to get to know a little bit more and may possibly apply. Consider, fee waivers and everything. Maybe all you really lose is time beyond that, but definitely consider that as well. I'll invite any of my other colleagues to jump in and add another final piece of advice before we close out. Go ahead, Lexi.
I'll just quickly add that I know that transfer can be a really confusing process. Many of you are currently at community colleges and you're dealing with articulation agreements perhaps, and then you're hearing our advice about applying to selective institutions. And know that they can work very well together, although they're two different processes. And that all 5 of us here today really hope, and our goal is that, attending this session or perhaps other ones that you may have attended earlier this fall, that you're really just thinking about a range of options. And that's really our goal for all of you, is that you're considering what all of the options may be. Articulation agreements are wonderful. And they're a great vehicle for those of you who are transferring from 2-year institutions, but don't discount adding some additional schools to those lists. And we're glad that you're here today. And we're hoping that some of you are consider applying to our institutions, but know that it's okay to have options. It's okay. And that's the goal, I think, from a lot of different perspectives, is that you have a few different potential acceptances on the table there, and you can weigh credit evaluations and financial aid and all of that. So I'll just sort of echo, I think, what Alex was saying too, in that we do encourage you to apply. And the process looks different, but that's okay.
I'll just say, you don't need it, but good luck. You're about to embark in a really difficult and important thing. And I have a lot of faith that the fact you showed up today means that you have what it takes to do this. So get to work, and you're going to be okay.
I think that's a perfect way to close it out, Adam. And on that note, so thank you all for joining us and participating in the session and the Q&A, or at least getting the information. Please do feel free to continue the conversation by getting in touch with us, email our main offices or our personal email addresses if you got those down earlier. It's usually on our websites as well. Please do keep in mind that we are in the middle of our reading season in many cases for our first-year pool, which starts a little bit earlier, so please allow a little bit of a delay for a response. But thank you all for joining us this evening, afternoon, or morning, or wherever you were. We hope this was helpful. We wish you the very best of luck going forward. Stay well, stay safe, and take care. Goodbye.